They called it theft. She called it the only way to keep a child alive. At exactly 6:42 on a misty spring morning in Hampshire, the gates of a billionaire's secluded countryside estate swung open unexpectedly violently. A black Aston Martin Vantage roared down the private lane, its engine screaming against the hush of dawn. At the wheel was not a chauffeur, not a family member, but a black woman in a faded uniform, no license, no permission, and no time. To the world she looked like a thief, but to the boy lying unconscious in the back seat, she was his only chance. And to the man who owned both the car and the boy she was about to become, the one person he could no longer ignore, what unfolded over the next 72 hours would unravel secrets, shatter prejudices, and rewrite what it means to be loyal and what it means to be seen. Elena Brooks had never touched the steering wheel of an Aston Martin in her life. In truth, she rarely touched anything that didn't come with instructions to polish, scrub, or sanitize. But that morning, the scent of burnt toast still lingering in the kitchen, she dropped the cleaning cloth and ran. It started with a cough, then came the silence. Little Liam, just 6 years old, had been spinning on the garden swing moments before shouting something about spaceships and marmalade. Now he was slumped in her arms, pale as porcelain, burning up and barely breathing. His eyes rolled back, his limbs limp. The intercoms in the estate weren't working. The landlines were dead from the last storm. And Sebastian Locke, his father, the elusive tech billionaire, was in Zurich for a conference. The nearest emergency services, over 40 minutes away. Elena called them anyway. They promised to send someone, but her eyes drifted to the garage. She knew that look on a child's face, the one between now and never again. She had seen it once before, in Lagos. Her brother hadn't made it. Her pulse slammed in her ears. The keys were right there left, carelessly on the counter near the wine fridge. She grabbed them with shaking fingers. The moment she pressed the ignition, the Vantage came to life, like a beast startled from slumber. The roar felt wrong in her hands, wrong and yet necessary. She tore through the gates without looking back, her apron still tied, her hands trembling. Liam lay in the back, strapped in awkwardly with a blanket beneath his head, his breathing shallow. His small hand clutched a Lego man. Halfway down the country lane, Elena whispered prayers in 3 languages, not for herself but for him. For the boy who called her Auntie Lenny, who preferred her cooking over the private chefs, who asked her to tuck him in when his father was too busy coding the next empire. She didn't see the estate manager calling security, didn't know the motion sensors had triggered an alert. All she knew was that if she waited, Liam might never open his eyes again. The Aston Martin cut through the winding countryside like a bullet, sleek, defiant, and far too fast. For the narrow roads of Hampshire, Elena's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Her breath came in shallow bursts, matching the rhythm of Liam's weakening pulse. Every bend felt sharper than the last. Every second dragged like wet fabric. The dashboard blinked warnings and soft blue lights, as if mocking her door not closed. Oil low. Emergency brake-off. She didn't care. Not today. The boy groaned in the back seat. Just once. It was enough to jolt her from panic into full resolve. "You stay with me, little lion," she whispered, stealing a glance in the mirror. His face glistened with sweat. His Lego man had fallen to the floor. "You're not leaving me too." It had been 10 years since she held a child in her arms and felt this kind of fear. 10 years since a Lagos hospital had failed her brother, too slow, too crowded, too indifferent. That day she swore she would never be helpless again. Behind her, a black security SUV appeared on the hill. They'd realized. She gritted her teeth and pushed the Vantage harder. The engine obeyed like a war horse. Speed cameras blinked as she passed the edge of the village, and pedestrians turned their heads as the midnight blue blur streaked by. No one expected to see a woman in a maid's uniform behind the wheel of a car like that. At the emergency bay of St. Aldwyn's Children's Hospital, the car screeched to a halt. Elena jumped out before the vehicle fully stopped, ripped open the rear door, and cradled Liam in her arms. "Help. Please," she shouted across the forecourt. 2 nurses and a security guard rushed over. A crash cart followed. "He's burning up. He collapsed. He couldn't breathe," Elena sobbed. There was no ambulance. There wasn't time. She barely noticed the onlookers, or the camera phones, or the fact that One of the nurses was staring at her in disbelief, not at the child, but at the car behind her. Within minutes, Liam was wheeled inside. The doors closed behind them. Elena stood alone. Sirens wailed in the distance. Her time was up. 2 officers approached her from behind. Elena Brooks. She turned slowly, still out of breath, eyes glassy. Yes. You're under arrest for unlawful vehicle use and endangerment. Hands where we can see them. And just like that, the woman who had saved a life was cuffed beside the car that wasn't hers in front of a hospital that didn't know her name. What she didn't know, standing there with wrists bound and knees trembling, was that across the channel in Zurich, a man's phone had just lit up with an emergency alert motion trigger. Aston Martin missing. Staff breach. And 15 seconds later, another message. Liam admitted. Critical condition. Sebastian Locke looked at the screen, and everything inside him stopped. Sebastian Locke's private jet touched down on the Southampton tarmac less than 2 hours after he saw the alert. The crew had never seen him move like that. Coat, half on laptop, still open, phone clutched, tight in one hand. By the time he arrived at St. Aldwyn's Children's Hospital, the air smelled of rain and iodine. A nervous junior doctor escorted him down the sterile corridors. Your son is stable, she said. Fever's down. He was brought in just in time. Sebastian exhaled for the first time in hours. But the relief was short-lived. There's one other thing. He turned to her sharply. The woman who brought him in. She's been detained by the police. For theft. Sebastian blinked. What theft? She stole your car. Silence. What she drove him here in your Aston Martin. His jaw tightened. The image in his mind was surreal. Elena Brooks, quiet, reserved. Elena, who rarely spoke unless spoken to, behind the wheel of his car. It made no sense. She folded towels. She cleaned the marble steps with surgical precision. She cooked better than the chef, but never bragged. She never asked for anything. And now, this. They stopped outside the observation window to Liam's room. Sebastian's gaze dropped to the small form beneath the white blanket. His son, his only child, was hooked up to an IV, a heart monitor blinking steadily beside him. Inside, a nurse adjusted his pillows. Outside, Sebastian said nothing. She carried him in herself. The doctor added gently. Didn't wait for security. Didn't care who was watching. Sebastian nodded slowly, as if putting together the pieces of a puzzle no one had given him the box for. Where is she now? Downstairs. In holding. With the police. He was already walking. In the small gray interview room, Elena sat upright in the steel chair, wrists free now, but red from the cuffs. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with worry, not fear. The officer beside her stood up when Sebastian entered. Mr. Locke, we've got your property secured. Pressing charges is of course your right. Elena didn't look up. Sebastian glanced between them, then turned to the officer. Leave us. Sir, I said leave. Now. The door closed with a soft click. Elena finally looked at him. His voice was low but steady. You stole my car. She didn't flinch. I saved your son. The words were simple, but they cut through the fog like glass. She said them without drama, without apology, as if reciting the truth of gravity. Sebastian stared at her. This woman who folded his shirts, polished his silver, and now sat before him, having risked everything, including her freedom, for a child that wasn't even hers. You could have killed him, he said finally. Or yourself. But I didn't, she replied. Silence hung between them. You didn't wait for an ambulance. Or the doctor. There wasn't time. He was slipping. I've seen it before. I knew the signs. You're not a doctor. I was a nurse, she said quietly, in Lagos, before the agency brought me here. That stopped him cold. I had to take care of my brother when he got sick, but we were too far. Too late. I won't let that happen to another child, yours or anyone's. Sebastian's mouth opened, but no words came. It was as if something had shifted. Something he hadn't known had been stuck. You can fire me, Elena said, standing now. I'm sure you will. But if I had to choose again, I'd still take the keys. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, Sebastian Locke, billionaire, technocrat, control freak, didn't see a maid. He saw the woman who had saved his son's life when no one else could. By the time Sebastian stepped out of the interview room, a light drizzle had started to fall on Southampton. He stood under the eaves outside the hospital, his mind caught in a fog he couldn't shake. He should have been furious. She had taken his car, but his son was alive, and that fact drowned out everything else. The police officer reappeared beside him. "Do you wish to press charges, sir?" Sebastian didn't answer right away. He looked out at the wet street where the Aston Martin now sat parked in a restricted bay, its hood glistening with rain. "No," he said at last. "Release her." But she release her. The officer hesitated, then gave a nod and walked away. Back upstairs, Sebastian stood at the doorway of Liam's hospital room. The boy was sleeping now, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Sebastian pulled the chair closer and sat. He hadn't planned on becoming a father, not so young, not so soon after losing Margot. But Liam had changed something in him, or maybe just reminded him of what still mattered when all the titles, contracts, and press releases were stripped away. And today, it wasn't the doctors or the estate staff or the millions in his accounts that had protected his son. It was the woman he had barely noticed for 2 years. He remembered the first time he'd seen Elena interviewed in the side kitchen, her hands folded, voice soft, accent faint. The agency had said she was competent, low profile, no fuss. He'd liked that. Back then, he had no space in his life for questions or warmth. And yet every time he came home, Liam was smiling. Someone had drawn a little doodle in his lunchbox. Someone had taught him how to tie his shoes before the private tutor even tried. It had been her, and he'd never said thank you, not once. Now, as he sat in that hospital room, surrounded by beeping monitors and pale curtains, he realized something far more uncomfortable than guilt. He had built his empire to control everything, data, outcomes, the future. But this woman, this maid, had shattered that illusion in one afternoon. And instead of resenting her for it, he was grateful. Meanwhile, Elena stood outside the hospital, unsure of where to go. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from emotional exhaustion. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Her phone was dead, and she didn't even know if she still had a job or a place to return to. The rain fell harder now. She didn't mind. At least Liam was safe. That was all that mattered. She turned to walk down the street, already planning to catch a bus back to the village when a black town car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. Sebastian sat in the back seat, his expression unreadable. "Get in," he said simply. Elena hesitated. "Sir, please." It was the first time he had ever said that word to her. She slid into the seat, soaking the leather, but he didn't seem to care. "I owe you more than an apology," he said after a moment. Elena kept her eyes forward. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why it mattered." They drove in silence for a while, the wipers whispering across the windshield. When they reached the estate, the gates opened automatically, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. As the car rolled past the security cameras, Sebastian glanced at Elena and asked, "What do you see yourself as, Elena?" A maid, she met his gaze without hesitation. "I see myself as someone who doesn't wait for permission to do the right thing." He nodded once slowly. "Then maybe it's time I stopped seeing you as someone who answers to me." The next, morning sunlight crept over the stone walls of the Loch countryside estate, turning dew into diamonds across the trimmed lawns. But inside the manor, the atmosphere was anything but serene, the kitchen staff whispered. The housekeeper paused mid-step when she saw Elena walk past. 2 groundskeepers lowered their voices when Sebastian entered the west wing. Everyone had heard. The maid had stolen the master's car, and he'd not only refused to press charges, he brought her back in his car. Something was shifting in the air, and the staff could feel it. In the break room, Mrs. Pettigrew, the head of housekeeping for 20 years, stirred her tea with unnecessary force. "It's improper," she muttered, "no matter what she did for the boy. There are rules." "Maybe the rules are the problem," said young Callum, the gardener's apprentice, without looking up from his toast. Down the hall, Sebastian stood in his study, staring out the window toward the stables. He'd hardly slept. Liam was recovering well, but Elena's words still echoed in his mind. "I see myself as someone who doesn't wait for permission to do the right thing." How long had it been since someone had spoken to him like that? He turned away from the window and picked up the phone. "Get me the estate solicitor and HR. I want to review all staff contracts. Today." Later that afternoon, Elena was folding linens in the utility room when a knock came. It was Benedict the butler. "Mr. Locke would like to see you," he said, voice formal. Elena wiped her hands and followed. In the drawing room, she found Sebastian by the fireplace, a folder in one hand, a cup of tea in the other. "You've worked here nearly 2 years," he began, "and I realize I know next to nothing about you." She tilted her head slightly. "That's how most people prefer it." "Not anymore," he said. "Not me." He handed her the folder. Inside was a new contract, except it wasn't for domestic staff. It bore a different title entirely. "Household Wellness Coordinator," she read aloud. "Technically, it's a newly created role," he said, "but it reflects what you've already been doing, managing Liam's nutrition, his routines, helping him regulate after everything." Elena looked up cautious. "Are you giving me a promotion? I'm recognizing what's always been there. And if I say no," he smiled faintly, "then we keep things as they were. You still have a place here." Elena closed the folder but said nothing for a moment. "You know," she said slowly, "when you hired me, I thought this job was just another way to disappear. It paid well. It was quiet. No one asked too many questions." Sebastian nodded. "But yesterday," her voice softened, "yesterday reminded me who I was before I started hiding." He said nothing, just listened. "I accept the new role," she said finally, "but not because of the title. Because of Liam." He smiled genuinely this time. "And because of you," she added after a beat. "You're changing." He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Not fast enough." "No," she said. "But you're moving." Outside the countryside, wind picked up, brushing past the glass panes like a promise. 2 days later, a photo leaked to the tabloids. It was grainy, but unmistakable. Elena, stepping out of the passenger side of Sebastian Locke's Aston Martin, outside the private emergency wing of a Southampton hospital. In the background, paramedics wheeled Liam through sliding glass doors. The headline the next morning read, "Billionaire's Maid or Secret Hero. Mysterious woman drives Locke's car to save his son." By lunch, it had gone viral. In London, cafes whispered, debates sparked. At business conferences in Munich and Antwerp, investors sent curious texts to Locke's publicist. And in the sun-dappled foyer of the Locke estate, Elena stood frozen, holding a newspaper she hadn't asked for, staring at her own blurred face in black and white. "What is this?" she whispered. Sebastian looked up from his tablet. He had seen the story too, dozens of times. His inbox was full of press requests. PR advisors had left voicemails urging damage control, but what struck him was something quieter. The public wasn't outraged. They were intrigued, sympathetic even. "She stole the car," one journalist wrote, "but only because bureaucracy would have let a child die." Another Locke's estate maid, Elena Brooks, took charge when no one else could. She didn't wait for permission. She acted. Sebastian walked across the foyer and gently took the paper from her hand. "You didn't ask for this," he said. "And I'm sorry it's out there now." Elena blinked slowly. "Are they going to come here?" "Reporters. They already tried," he said. "But I've asked security to keep them off the grounds." Her shoulders relaxed a little, but only a little. "I don't want attention," she said quietly. "I know." He hesitated, then added, "But maybe it's time the world paid attention to the right people for once." She looked at him, then really looked past the billionaire veneer, past the tailored clothes, past the once distant father. And for the first time, she saw not a man trying to control the narrative, but a man trying to protect it. "I can take the fall," she said. "Tell them I panicked. That I acted without permission." But he shook his head. "No, you don't have to carry that weight." They stood in silence for a beat. Then gently he asked, "Would you consider speaking publicly? Not about me, about what you did, why you did it?" Elena hesitated, not because she feared the questions, but because she had never been asked to explain her actions in her own words before. People like her, immigrants, cleaner staff behind the doors, were always expected to stay quiet, to serve and disappear. But maybe that was exactly what needed to change. Not for fame, not for followers, but for every woman in every silent corridor who had ever had to make the hardest choice and been judged for surviving it. She straightened her spine. "If I speak," she said, "I want it to be real. No spin, No sugarcoating? Sebastian smiled. Good, he said, because I've had quite enough of sugarcoating. 3 days later, a quiet ripple began online. No press conference, no TV appearance, no publicist polished soundbite. Instead, a single post, a video no more than 4 minutes recorded in the modest staff garden behind the Lock estate. Elena sat on a bench beneath a willow tree, her hands folded in her lap, her uniform still plain, her voice steady. I didn't steal a car, she said, looking into the lens. I made a choice. She explained what had happened that morning, how Liam collapsed, how the phones were down, how no one was around. I did what any mother would do, she said, even though he's not my son. Her eyes softened, but he is someone's son, and that's enough. The video ended without music, without drama. Just her final words, clear and soft. Sometimes the rules protect the powerful. But the right thing doesn't always wait for permission. By the end of the first day, the video had 400,000 views. By the end of the week, it passed 5 million. And the comments poured in. She didn't break the rules, she revealed which ones were broken. That woman is exactly who I want looking after my child. More heroes in aprons, fewer men in suits. Elena never responded to the comments. She didn't need to. The truth was enough. Back at the estate, Sebastian watched the video from his office twice. The first time as a father, the second as a man who knew what power looked like and how often it wore the wrong face. She's not just a caretaker, his sister Amelia said over tea that evening. She's a leader. You realize that, right? Sebastian nodded slowly. I do now. Amelia raised an eyebrow. So, what are you going to do with that realization? He didn't answer right away. But he already knew, not just about Elena, about the company, about the future, about the story they'd been telling the world, and the one they should be telling instead. The call came on a Wednesday morning. Elena had just finished preparing Liam's breakfast, scrambled eggs with herbs from the garden, when Benedict the butler stepped in with a phone in hand. It's for you, he said, tone a shade more formal than usual. From the Global Care Foundation. Elena wiped her hands and took the phone unsure. Miss Brooks, the voice on the other end, was crisp but warm. My name is Dr. Helen Marwood. I'm the executive chair of the foundation. I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, ma'am, Elena said, glancing at Liam, who was humming to himself, building towers out of toast. I saw your video, Doctor. Marwood continued. More importantly, so did the board. We'd like to invite you to speak at our upcoming International Forum on Ethical Care Geneva next month. Your perspective is necessary. Elena's instinct was to say no. She wasn't a speaker. She was a cleaner. She still folded sheets at the end of every day. But something in her chest, a quiet courage, urged her not to retreat this time. Would I have to talk about Mr. Locke, she asked. Only if you want to, the woman replied. We're interested in your story, not your employer's. I'll think about it, Elena said. Please do. We've already received messages from healthcare leaders who believe your voice could change policy. When she hung up, Liam looked up from his plate. Auntie Lenny, he said, are you going somewhere? Maybe, she replied, kneeling next to him. Do you think I should? He thought for a moment. Will it help other kids like me? She smiled. It might. Then yes, he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. That evening, she found Sebastian in the library. I got a call, she began. I heard, he said, setting down his glass. Marwood's a force of nature. Geneva would be lucky to have you. I'm not a policy expert. No, he agreed. You're better. You've lived it. She hesitated at the doorway. Would it bother you if I spoke? Publicly, he looked up sincere. Elena, I think it would be an insult to everything you've done not to speak. She exhaled slowly, nodding, then paused. There's one more thing. What is it? She met his eyes. Maybe it's time we told the whole truth. He stilled. You mean yes, about who I was before this? Sebastian considered her words carefully. You don't owe the world that. No, she said, but I owe it to the girl I used to be. The one who thought silence was safety. Outside, the wind picked up scattering petals from the climbing roses along the stone paths. The quiet before the storm, or maybe finally the beginning of something long overdue. The grand hall in Geneva shimmered with soft white light, its vaulted ceiling arching high above. Diplomats, healthcare experts, policymakers, and journalists from around the globe. This wasn't a place where women like Elena Brooks were usually invited. But there she stood, not in a polished designer suit, but in a tailored dress she borrowed from Amelia Locke, simple, elegant. Elena's only request had been, "Something that doesn't hide who I am." The moderator introduced her as a voice that didn't come from politics, but from courage. She stepped up to the podium, hands steady. "I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not even a manager," Elena began. "I'm a housekeeper." Or at least that's what the world saw. A quiet murmur stirred in the crowd. But when a child couldn't breathe, I didn't ask myself what my job title was. I asked myself what would happen if I waited for permission. She paused, let the words settle. "My name is Elena Brooks. I grew up undocumented. I raised my sister alone. I've worked jobs where people didn't even bother to remember my name. I've watched systems fail the most vulnerable people over and over again. And then I didn't save that boy because I was brave. I saved him because nobody else would. And that's what frightens me most, that there are rules and structures so rigid, so afraid of risk, that they would rather let a child die than let someone like me drive." The hall was silent now, not from indifference, but from reverence. Elena's voice softened. "I'm not here to be praised. I'm here because this room decides policies, budgets, protocols. But none of that matters if the people who wipe the floors and hold the hands and carry the weight are left invisible." Her final words rang with quiet force. "You don't need to lift us up. Just stop pushing us down." A beat of stillness. Then someone stood, and another, then dozens. A standing ovation, not for celebrity, but for truth. Backstage, Sebastian waited, hands clasped behind his back. When Elena returned, she looked almost stunned. "That was," she began, but he finished for her. Exactly what the world needed. She gave him a faint smile. "I thought I'd be terrified." "You should be," he said with a smirk. "You've just changed the rules." Later that evening, headlines spread across Europe. "The housekeeper who shook. The system from silent staff to global advocate. Elena Brooks speaks for millions, not a Mayday movement." Elena returned to the countryside estate in Southampton to find a letter waiting for her, handwritten. No return address. It read, "I saw you speak. I'm 19, I clean hotel rooms in Vienna. I've never heard anyone say what you said, not in a room full of power. You made me feel like maybe I'm not small. Thank you." She folded the letter gently. The girl who had once believed her life would always remain hidden behind others' wealth now held the voices of thousands in her hands. 2 weeks after the Geneva speech, Elena Brooks was still receiving letters. From women in kitchens, from men in nursing homes, from janitors in airports, nannies in Brussels, train cleaners in Oslo. Each message echoed the same truth: "You made me visible." But amidst the waves of praise came a proposal. The European Alliance for Ethical Care, an influential coalition backed by governments and private funders, invited her to join as an executive advisor, a salaried position, a team, a voice in every major discussion from labor policy to child safety regulation. They called it a revolution in care. Amelia Locke was the first to see the letter on the kitchen counter. "You're going to take it, right?" she asked over tea. Elena was silent. "Then I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" Elena stared out the window, watching Liam chase butterflies across the garden. "I came here to find peace, to provide stability, not to become a symbol." Amelia tilted her head. "Elena, you are a symbol. But more than that, you're a builder. You don't have to stand on a podium. You can sit at the table, rewrite the policies, make it safer for the next woman like you who holds someone's baby at 3 a.m. and wonders if anyone would care if she disappeared." That night, Elena sat in the little room where she used to fold towels and think of her sister. She held 2 photographs in her lap. One of her and Sophia, aged 14 and 7, smiling at a refugee camp in Calais. The other of Liam asleep in her arms the night after the fever broke. She thought of all the times she had been silent to survive, and how maybe it was time to speak to build. A month later, at the Alliance's opening summit in Berlin, Elena Brooks took the stage once more, not as a guest, but as a founding voice. Sebastian Locke watched from the front row, now known not just as a billionaire, but as the man who restructured his entire foundation around care work. He didn't care about applause anymore. He cared that Liam was safe. He cared that Elena's name would be remembered not as a scandal, but as a shift. That spring, schools across Europe included a new case study in their social ethics curriculum, the Elena Brooks Standard, when compassion defies class. In Southampton, the Locke estate quietly opened its staff-led training institute where domestic workers could gain certifications, legal protections, and most importantly, dignity. On the gate, a small brass plaque. Here every voice is heard. Every life has value. Elena never sought recognition, but she earned something far rarer: legacy. And the next time a woman like her drives a car to save a child, no one will ask if she had permission, because Elena already gave it to all of them. Sometimes the ones the world ignores are the very people holding it together. Elena Brooks didn't ask for power. She earned it through compassion, courage, and quiet resilience. She didn't just cross lines. She redrew them. And in doing so, she reminded us all that dignity isn't tied to a uniform, salary, or a surname. It's found in the way we treat each other, especially when no one's watching. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on the unseen heroes in your life, take a moment, leave us a comment. And if you'd like to hear more stories that matter, that lift the voices too often left unheard, consider subscribing to the channel, not just to follow stories, but to be part of a community that believes in rewriting them. Thank you for watching.